can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat, Sleep, Boxing, Repeat.
ESBR Boxing Wheel, back myself and Paul Kelly. We are here in preview mode, but before we get into the fight we're going to take a look at, please like and subscribe to the channel. Obviously, check out our big fight breakdowns, reviews, previews, interviews, features, fight footage, all of that good nature, event footage, all your boxing needs up and under one roof. But Paul, as mentioned, we are here in preview mode and we are previewing WBO World Welterweight action that's taking place in Ota City, Japan. And we're talking about obviously Brian Norman Jr. versus Jin Sasaki. Obviously, we'll pick out some themes, obviously, from the division. We'll take a look at Norman and maybe some potential fights after this, depending on, I suppose, the predictions. But I'd like to get straight in with it, Paul. Please give me your thoughts on this fight, and please give me your predictions on the winner and the method by which they'll win, please.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Always a good time of the week to be speaking to you when it comes to a preview. And this week's no different. I think, yeah, I actually like this fight. I think when you look at when you talk about the welterweight division, everyone kind of talks about Boots Ennis, really, don't they, as the champion? But I think Brad Norman, I don't think he's as good as Boots, but I still think he's a brilliant world class fighter. 27-0, 21 stoppages, and he's only 24. I think he is a really good fighter. I think he had a good win last time out, back to back knockouts as well. Yeah, so I really like Brian Norman. In terms of this fight, I think Sasaki's a game opponent too, big time. Massive puncher himself, 17 stoppages in his 19 victories. You look at you look at his only defeat was like round 11, I think it was, stoppage to Harioka, which was a good few years ago now. So he's a really good fighter. He's a credible opponent. I still think Brian Norman Jr. wins this. I don't know whether that's because I'm maybe quite high on Brian Norman Jr. I do think he is a really competent, good fighter. Will be up against the Japanese fighter in Japan, of course. If it goes to the scorecards, will he get a fair decision? If it's close, who knows? But yeah, I like Brian Norman Jr. here. I think he wins the fight. I think he wins the fight via decision. I'm going to go with Brian Norman Jr. to win on points, actually, mate. Do enough. I think he'll maybe do enough to win it where you can't give it to Sasaki on points. But ultimately, I think Brian Norman Jr. wins this. It's a good fight and it's a close fight. But yeah, as I've said a couple of times already, I do actually think Brian Norman Jr. could be the real deal. He's a very good world-class fighter in my book.
Yeah, very interesting thoughts and predictions. I think like you sort of surfaced something very interesting there, which obviously Brian Norman fighting in Japan here. Therefore, what will the decision be like? Would he have to win kind of 8 rounds to get a close points decision sort of thing? Would he have to win him handsomely? I like the fight. I think it's a good fight. I think like you, I think Brian Norman's a good fighter. And the fight's obviously, the stoppage of Santalam was a good victory as well. He's had some other good names on that record. I think for me, I'm not going to, pretend that I've seen too much of Sasaki, to be perfectly honest with you. People can tell from his record that he does obviously bang hard. I've got a suspicion, to be perfectly honest with you, I think Brian Norman's going to win this, but he's actually win it by stoppage. And I'm actually going to go second half of the fight. To be honest with you, I'm not sure what I'm basing that on. I think, I don't know, I almost feel like Will he find that extra gear being down there? Will he have fought better opposition? Will he find that extra gear being away from home? I think a stoppage victory for me, Brian Norman. Again, I'm not gonna. I think Brian Norman wins, and you sit in the same points. It's not ridiculous to sit not ridiculous prediction to me at all. I can see points as well, but for me, I just favour Brian Norman stoppage somewhere sort of 8 to 12. You mentioned there, obviously Brian Norman. You mentioned. Obviously, you talked a little bit about the sort of scene in the division. Obviously, talking about Boots Ennis. Obviously, you've got other names in there like some Stanionis, Barrios, so those sort of names that are sort of mentioned in and around that division. Where do you kind of see Norman? At welterweight. Where do you rank him welterweight? You said you were sort of high. You said he might not necessarily be as good as Boots. But where do you see him? Is he number 2 fighter for you, or is the landscape close?
Yeah, I think I have Boots at one. Um, See, I thought Stanionis was probably number two, but I think Norman maybe number two now for me, to be honest. Behind Boots, I think. Yeah, Barrios. I haven't beaten Barrios. Obviously, that fight might not happen. Depending on what happens between Barrios and Pacquiao, which is a mad thing to say in the year of 2025. But yeah, I think. Yeah, I'm gonna. You know what? Yeah, I'll go number two. I think Brian Norman Jr. is second best fighter in the welterweight division, behind behind Darren Boots Ennis. And yeah, put it this way, like I don't know if you were going to ask me or not, but if Brian Norman Jr. was to fight Conor Benn tomorrow, I'll be backing Brian Norman Jr. to win.
Yeah, I think interesting one for me. I think you're right. I think Boots is number one. To be perfectly honest with you, but I look at Look, I quite like Stanionis as well. Obviously, he didn't fare too well last time out against Boots, so I'd probably have to still have Norman just based on his kind of record and what we saw last time out against Stanionis. But I think that's Stanionis at 3, and then obviously have Norman at 2 for me. So yeah, not dissimilar to what you're saying. We've left with favourites, I suppose, a little bit on some sort of fancy fights in that division. And you mentioned obviously Pacquiao, you mentioned Barrios. You mentioned Boots as well as being better, but if you say Boots, let's take about Brian Norman against these 3 fighters. So if you're going Brian Norman versus Boots, I want you to say stoppage or points. I'll just fire a couple of other names at you, and then we'll let everyone else decide and comment as well. So yeah, Norman Jr. versus Boots. How does that go? Who wins and how?
Yeah, I think Boots wins that. Points.
I agree. I think points as well. Norman Jr. versus Barrios,
Norman Jr. Points.
and I've been saying this, but Norman Jr. against Manny Pacquiao.
Oh, if Pacquiao beats Barrios and becomes champion, and then we get this unification, is that what you mean? Oh man, yeah. He beat Pacquiao, but I just hope he wouldn't stop him. Almost, I kind of don't want to see him get
Yeah,
stopped, but I have a fear. I have a fear that Brian Norman Jr. maybe would stop Pacquiao.
I think he'd stop Pacquiao, yeah. I love that as well. And then last but not least, Conor Benn. Conor Benn's a welterweight. He gets up there, he gets a decent shot. They're talking about him maybe high up in that division. Norman Jr. versus Conor Benn. Who wins now?
Yeah, I was actually impressed in spells with Conor Benn's performance against the fully fledged middleweight, arguably super middleweight, and Chris Eubank Jr. But back down at 147, I don't see him beating Brian Norman. I don't see him beating any of the champions. Maybe Barrios, maybe back him to beat Barrios, Conor Benn. But in terms of the action, what we're talking about, Brian Norman Jr. Yeah, I've got Norman Jr. beating him. I'm beating Conor Benn. Method of victory, stoppage.
Yeah, I actually think I think he'd get battered as well. I wasn't impressed with Conor Benn versus Chris Eubank. I thought he looked quite sloppy. I think his punches were really on point. Like either it was rusty or he just didn't look like the snap that he had obviously pre time out of the ring. So I think make of that what you will. But I think against those guys, the elite guys and even the upper world level guys in any division, I think Conor Benn will struggle with. Frankly, I think he sort of lacks the fundamentals to kind of get that done. So I'd also have Norman Jr. beating him. But for the guys, that is sadly all we have time for in this fight. But Paul and I are aligned on Norman Jr. beating Sasaki. I've gone stoppage. Paul is going to go points, but we are in agreement that he's going to win. Obviously, let us know in the comments how you see this fight playing out. Also, maybe let us know, how you think Norman Jr. ranks at welterweight, as well as how he fares in some of those fantasy matchups. Even your thoughts, on how Manny Pacquiao gets on in those matchups as well. Obviously, Pacquiao, drives some good chat as well. Conor Pacquiao, Ben, big great fight potentially as well down the line. Not involved in Norman Jr. But Paul, thank you very much for joining me, guys. As always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back with more previews and reviews shortly. Like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you again. Goodbye.
Cheers, mate. All the best.